Yai, yanai, rai, yanai, nanai, nai, nai, nanai, nai, 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 hene, nanai, nanai, nai, 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 hanai, nanai, nai, 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 hanai, nanai, nai, nai, na 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 hit it na 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 hit it na 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 hit it na 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 Shalom, shalom, beautiful friends. It is great to be with you, and I'm so sorry we're starting late. That is completely my fault that we're a few minutes late here, so please forgive me. I was not managing my schedule well enough. And if we ever start a minute or two late, blame nobody but me for that. It's always entirely on me. I'm so happy to be with you all and to talk about 10 of the greatest Jewish ideas contributed to the world. And today is class 7 already. It's probably worth me saying already that our next series, if you choose to stay with us, is going to be on the 10 greatest lessons on leadership that Judaism has to teach, as I suggest. And as I suggest here, if you ever think that one of the 10 is missing, it's always great to hear from you. And session 10, we'll talk about that. Like, what would your list of 10 be, and how does that match up with mine? I would love to hear that from you. And the same with the 10 leadership lessons. And by the way, by leadership, I don't mean like there's the leader up there and then there's the rest of us. I mean, all of us participate in exercising leadership. And how do we learn from those values? In any case, today's 10 greatest Jewish ideas, we're going to look at life affirmation, which may sound similar, but in many ways is quite different from the previous 6 we've already looked at, and certainly the remaining 3. Life affirmation. Okay, let's start with a poll question here. On life, option 1, living matters more than living by principles. Option 2, living by principles matters more than living. Option 3, just way too hard to imagine the question of giving up my life for anything. That's a really tricky question, but option 1 is that having my own life and the value of life matters more than living by our most cherished principles. Option 2 is living by our most cherished principles matters more than preserving life. And option 3 is just too hard to even really get my head around that. Okay, as always, that does not exhaust all of our options. We can all probably think of many others we put in here. But ask yourself, is there something you would be willing to give your life before doing or not doing? Or is there not, because the value of life is so high? Wow. Nobody said living matters more than living by my principles. That's very interesting. 60% said living by my principles matters more than living, in some cases, even if they're rare. And 40% said it's just too hard to imagine. And I totally get that. Okay, friends, let's dive in. In the book of Deuteronomy, Sefer Devarim, Moshe speaks to the children of Israel, reminding them of the instructions and mitzvot that he has conveyed to them from God. Towards the end of the book in Parshat Nitzavim, he sums it all up by saying, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. I have put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Uvacharta b'chayim, choose life, if you and your offspring would live. Choose life. The choosing of life, uvacharta b'chayim, is the Jewish idea we're going to explore today. Let's discuss what life itself, why life itself is a fundamental value, what that idea means within the Jewish tradition, practically, historically, culturally, and morally. First, we can notice the central role of halakha in Judaism for many, the vast scope that it occupies in Jewish scholarship and literary output, and the role it plays in our Jewish identities. Halakha is often translated as Jewish law, but the word derives from the root for walking and is really about an embodied way of life. Faith, abstract thought, and legend all have places within the Jewish tradition, but the great emphasis put on practice, on what we do, how we behave in the here and now, are a special feature of Judaism. While the next world matters too, we care deeply, passionately about how to live life in this world. And that question occupies our erudite scholarship, as well as our folk wisdom, our popular movements, as well as our elitist esoteric circles in all eras and generations. The phrase, my nafkamina, what practical difference does it make, is ever present in the rabbinic discourse throughout the Talmud, my nafkamina. As we discussed in our section on Shabbat, literary figure Chaim Nachman Bialik wrote an essay in the early 20th century about the nature of halakha. He wrote, halakha, law is, however, a creative act no less than agadah, legend. Its art is the greatest in the world, the art of life and ways of life. It's material, the living human with all the inclinations of their heart. Its means, personal, social, and national education. Its fruits, a continuous series of days of pleasing deeds and living, the clearing of a path of life among personal and communal obstacles and hurdles, a pleasant human existence in the world, a correct way of living. Through this Jewish art form of crafting beauty and human life with the tools of halakha, we can learn to appreciate the central importance of life, real life and living here in this world, moment by moment. We might expect that having life in the here and now at the center of Jewish thought could lead to hedonism, as has happened in other schools of thought that have put life in this world at the center of their ideologies. But in fact, the word used in Hebrew for heretic is apikoros, which comes from Epicureanism, a Greek school of hedonist philosophy. The sages of the Mishnah and the Talmud saw themselves as in direct opposition to Epicureanism. In the Ethics of the Fathers, at Pirkei Avot, Rabbi Elazar advises one to be diligent in the study of Torah and know how to answer an epikuros. Judaism does embrace pleasure and joy, of course. Psalm 100, sung in the daily morning service, calls us to worship the Lord in gladness. Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha. Come into God's presence with shouts of joy. This is not to be some form of suffering. This is to be joyous, whatever we participate in. And the Hasidic movement, beginning in the 18th century in Eastern Europe, elevated joy to a high ideal of relationship to God, especially such figures as Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who taught that it is a great mitzvah to always be happy. Right? That's a great quote to always remember. It's a mitzvah to be happy. But Judaism embraces all aspects of life, not just the pleasures. Life in all of its complexity, all of its joy and struggle, its hardship and its comfort, its disappointment and its accomplishment, its loss and its delight, is sacred and to be appreciated. One is obligated to recite a blessing for the bad, just as one recites a blessing for the good. The Mishnah teaches in Brachot, right? We bless the bad in addition to blessing the good. The Talmud tells of a debate that raged for 2 years among the early sages. Is it preferable or more comfortable or more pleasant for people to have been created than not created? Or is it preferable, more comfortable, more pleasant, for humans to have never been created at all? Right? Was it in humans' interest to have been created? If you had a scale and you measured all the suffering of the world versus the pleasures of the world, or all of the meaning of life versus the destruction of meaning, which would outweigh the other? Finally, they took a vote, which is kind of funny. The rabbis took a vote whether humans should have been created or not, and concluded that it would have been preferable that humans never had been created. But they went on, as long as we are created, we should examine our actions and try to live as good of a life as we can. We acknowledge that life is not made of pleasure, but we embrace life for its own sake, in spite of its inherent discomfort. Right? So it's an interesting question to ask yourself. If you wrote down on a piece of paper two sides of the paper saying, if I added up all the meaning in my life throughout my life, all the joys and pleasures I've experienced, and on the other side, all the pain I had in middle school of kids making fun of me, all the pain I had of hunger or of sickness, all the suffering I've had of trying to make meaning of life, or my own fear of death, my own illnesses and the like, which is greater? Then on another sheet, we might ask ourselves, and maybe it's too hard to do personally, so we can do about the collective, have I added more good to the world, or have I taken more from the world? When I say taken, I don't mean robbery. I merely mean self-benefit. Have I benefited more from the world by my house, my clothes, my education, the relationships I've had? Have I given back to the world as much as I've taken? Wow, that's a hard question. In fact, it's a good flip question on the first, because if in the first, let's say someone says, I have had much more pleasure than suffering in this world, we then have to face the reality. Have I fed as much pleasure back towards others as I have received myself? If I were to ask myself that question, it's probably only fair to share myself, since I'm asking others to do that. I would say I have experienced far more goodness than suffering in my life. I'm very blessed in that regard. But on the second, my answer would be more negative. I am so far off being anywhere close to being able to say I've given back to the world anywhere close to the blessings I've received, because of how much benefit I've had. And that's a scary, and I've sometimes wondered what the gates of heaven question would be. And the scariest question for me is that question: did you give more than you took from the world? In any case, I would like to acknowledge another complication in the truth that Judaism embraces the life of the here and now. We are also a religion that cares deeply about memory, about our past, not only about living in the present. With our history of living our lives threatened by external forces, the value of life affirmation is a vital counterbalance to the importance of memory. Yes, we need to remember past injustice, but we affirm life in the present by not remaining stuck in the trauma. We must keep the possibility of healing in mind, choosing life, transcending trauma to the extent possible. Rabbi Yehuda Loew ben Bezalel, the great Maharal of Prague of the 16th century, is the subject of a legend, admittedly of much later origin, in which he crafts and brings to life a golem in order to protect the Jews from persecution. If you have no idea what I'm talking about golem, it's worth Googling. The actual Maharal of Prague produced words to enliven the spirit of the people instead. On Passover, we say, in each and every generation, a person is obligated to see themselves as if they left Egypt themselves. About that line, the Maharal teaches, there are those who ask, what good has the leaving of Egypt done for us? We are enslaved among the other kingdoms. What difference is there really between the kingdom of Egypt and the other kingdoms? The Maharal answers, these words are nonsense. For when Israel went out from Egypt, they received the essential good, such that they were capable themselves of being free by dint of their elevation. And that elevation is essential to Israel, that they are capable of being free by dint of their own essential elevation. And a happenstance cannot nullify an essential thing at all, because Israel still has that elevation. They are essentially free, even though they happen to be enslaved. Because since HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought Israel out of Mitzrayim and made them free, and not only that, but even kings, as it says, and you shall be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, that name applies to Israel's essence, and the elevation and the importance in it is not nullified in their exile, which is only by happenstance. Accordingly, the sages of Israel say, all of Israel are princes, even in their exile. And that is by way of their elevation and the importance that the Israelites in its essence received, which is not nullified by happenstance at all. By the way, tangentially, around Passover time a month ago, I put something on social media somewhere about how the Jews were slaves in Egypt and thanking God that we were freed or something, from this. And someone Egyptian alive today raged on this post Like, they knew nothing about this experience, 3,300 years ago, or about the Torah or the biblical narrative. Thought that I was accusing Egypt of like recently enslaving Jews. And they were raging on this post that I, like all the other Jewish liars, are pretending that Egypt has enslaved Jews. This is a made up Jewish story like all of our other lies. And it was actually hilarious because, the person, was saying that this whole claim of slavery in Egypt was some, part of our great Jewish lies that we tell today. But I couldn't stop laughing when I read this, that someone in Egypt was saying that I was lying about the Exodus. In any case, the Maharal's voice, coming to us from 16th century Central Europe, reminds us to focus on the deep, fundamentally true majesty of the life we have, not on passing oppression we experience or carry with us from past generations. His teaching about recognizing one's essential power and privilege is an affirmation of life that can be a powerful antidote to the trap of victimization. If we focus on our victimhood, whoever we're talking about, here we're just talking about Jews, but this can apply to lots of minorities. Right? If all we focus on is our victimhood and our entitlement, we may respond reactively and defensively and neglect to check in with the higher questions of living a good and just life. Right? Those demands. But if we recognize our own true power as appointed royalty, so to speak, then we have to face and live up to the responsibility of living justly on this earth. So just to summarize this point before we move on, this idea is part of life affirmation is not just quantitative, but the qualitative dimension of accepting responsibility for our lives. Choose life, choose to live in the present, not just the victimhood of the past. Like, I'm not dismissing trauma. I'm not dismissing victimhood. I'm just saying that all of us have the work to try to transcend some of our own shadows and our own histories, partially in order to choose life and to move forward into the future, not just be stuck in the past, when possible, as hard as that can be. Moses said, "Uvacharta b'chaim," choose life. The first word is as important as the second word. We are no longer slaves and never again can be, because we have the power, the privilege, and the weighty responsibility of choice. Right? Uvacharta, choose life. We're talking about the affirmation of life, but also the power of choice. That freedom, combined with the infinite value of human life, along with the weight of obligation to our traditional values, leads to moral questions that are not always easy to answer. Book of Maccabees tells that the Seleucid forces attacked a particular cell of Jewish rebels on Shabbat. The rebels refused to lift a stone in their defense because it was Shabbat, and the soldiers killed them all. Hearing about this, the Maccabean leadership understood that they were at risk of annihilation if they continued in the same way, and they agreed they would fight to defend themselves, even on Shabbat. Under the Roman persecutions a few hundred years later, the rabbis met in secret and voted on the trade-offs of risking one's life to practice Judaism properly, as told in Tractate Sanhedrin of the Talmud. They concluded that if a person tells you to transgress this commandment of the Torah, or I will kill you, you should transgress the commandment and avoid being killed, with three exceptions, famously: idolatry, sexual violations, and murder. For those three, one should die before transgressing. There is another exception, which is when there is so much persecution that they're going to kill people for even the most trivial things. From the Maccabees' decision to violate Shabbat and the sages' ruling overriding almost the entire Torah, we learn the great importance of pikuach nefesh, saving a life, in Jewish ethical and legal considerations. But at the same time, from the hesitations of the Maccabees and from the fact that the sages left significant exceptions, we learn that the value of saving life resides within a morality that includes other values too, which are sometimes in tension or competition. Indeed, many of the sages who legislated the priority of life over almost all of Torah are remembered as martyrs for dying at the hands of the Romans after teaching Torah against the imperial decree to not teach or you'll be killed. Friends, moving towards a conclusion here, even in the valuing of life, there is balance. Pikuach nefesh does not only apply apply to facing imminent death, it inculcates a need to care for life, quality of life, our own life, and others' lives. However, it is possible to apply pikuach nefesh too broadly. Discomfort is a part of life, part of living within this tradition, and we are not meant to invoke pikuach nefesh to justify any transgression of our values for the sake of comfort. Also, we cannot allow the drive to defend Jewish life to justify decisions that bankrupt the morality of our souls as individuals or as a people. God is referred to as Elohim Chayim, a living God, the God of life. God is the source of life. God is identified with life. God is the model of life. God defines life. By choosing life, we choose to care about how we are living in the here and now, to participate in the most holy endeavor. By choosing to embrace life with its fullness and complexity, its joys and its sorrows, its pain and its pleasure. By choosing to recognize the responsibility of being empowered with a life of freedom. By choosing to hold close the moral value of life and balance it in the human challenge of ethical decision-making. In brief, again, by choosing life, we are choosing to walk in the way of God. Okay, friends, that is my opening, and there is so much more to discuss, and I'd love to, I would love to hear from you. Yes, hi, Judy.
I always took that part of Nitzavim as saying that I am presenting you a way of life that makes you holy and that makes for a good community and one that supports one another. And that is the life I want you to choose. Don't choose death, which would be rejection of my mitzvot and the ethical precepts that I've provided to you. Metaphorically, that's death. Also, it would engender conflict, which would mean the death of the Israelite community. So I'm not quite as literal. I understand that we can derive the principle of choosing life as a literal idea, but I think metaphorically it's so much richer.
Great, Judy. I'm so glad you said that. I want to break up that verse into three eras. In the biblical literal sense, it's funny you said that what you're saying is not literal, but in the biblical literal sense, I think that what is happening there is very much in line with how Judy presented it, which is that it doesn't really just mean the value of life. It means the good life, the life you've just been taught to live. And if you don't choose that life you were just taught to live, you're choosing curses, you're choosing death. So choose this good life that I've just taught you. I think that is pshat. That is the literal read of what's happening there. Then the second era of rabbinic interpretation goes on to treat, interesting enough, the rabbis are more literal than the biblical intention, which is to say life there means life, not good life. And the rabbis think that partially means, in addition to what Judy said is kind of a biblical is the shot of is the literal read of the Torah itself, that actually we should protect life itself. Then I want to go post-Kant. Why do I want to go post-Kant? Because pre-Kant, Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, what we thought was there was a binary. There's the good path of life and there's the evil path. There's the moral and the immoral, and we know collectively what is good and what is bad. We know what is moral and what is immoral, and the only moral project is disciplining ourselves enough to be on the good path rather than the bad path that everyone knows. Post-Kant, it's a little bit arbitrary to say him, but not totally. The question emerges in modern philosophy, what is the good life? Actually, are we so sure that what has been assumed to be the good is what is actually good? Or do we need to kind of reconstruct moral paradigms as to what is the good? And so the first literal read is live the mitzvot. The second rabbinic read, in addition to that, is that life itself, even beyond living the good life, is inherently valuable. And then the third is going back to the literal read as well, to some degree, that choosing the good life is not merely a matter of discipline, but an intellectual and spiritual project of determining what is good. Judy, you want to respond at all?
Yeah, I mean, as a woman, I find that the popular consensus among intellectuals and the people who've had time to be intellectuals, which are men, um, it doesn't really work for me. So I don't I don't swallow the notion that the good life is what people tell me it is. I think we all have to figure that out, and it has to be part of a continually negotiated social contract.
Yeah, Judy, thank you for saying that, because it only takes being excluded by, or feeling excluded, or being excluded by the history of intellectuals, which were very small number, to come to question that. If one was a woman and realized women were not writing any of that until relatively recently, and if one was a person of color, if one was a Jew, by and large, and a whole bunch of other possibilities. In fact, one of the ones I was thinking about this morning as well was people who have bodies with different abilities. People with bodies with different abilities were not included among the elitist of thinkers, by and large. And many of the ways of assumption, I mean, just go to the Greeks, for example, who part of athleticism and physical abilities was such a big part of the culture. In any case, yeah, thank you for saying that. And today, those of us who participate in adult learning experience ought to feel how big of a rare gift that is for us to participate in something that that few historically have had access to. Anyways, lots more to say there, but thank you so much, Judy. Okay, let me say something else while others are thinking about what they want to share. I want to say something about the importance of sadness. Today, we live in, I mean, it's a common phrase to use today, toxic positivity. Those who suggest that we should only be positive and kind of dismiss the things that make us feel down. And I think that that today sadness is treated as a problem that we should go to a therapist for, that we should get medication for. Now, of course, depression is very real. And of course, therapists can be valuable to us. And certainly medication can be valuable to us. But I want to make the case for being sad, being okay. That it's not a problem of our age that people are sad that has to be cured of their sadness. That actually being sad is part of the human experience. And embracing life and the fullness of life also means embracing the fullness of emotions in life. And that sometimes if we're anxious, we feel, oh my gosh, it's a problem that I'm nervous. I need to solve that problem of being nervous. But being nervous or anxious, to a level that can be contained, is not only normal, but part of the fullness of life. Or being afraid, or all these other experiences we have. And today we often judge many of these emotions as not being a part of the fullness of life we want. And but I think part of what we're talking about here is not only the length of life and living the good moral life and good religious or spiritual life, but also living the fullness of life. Okay, Gary Friedlander, over to you.
Morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm in Denver, so I have a little bit of an echo. Your question from the poll question struck a chord with me of the good life. So I it's a question, not a comment. So on one end, do we give back more than we receive? And then on the other end, do we become so obsessed with giving that we don't appreciate what we would consider the good life. Are we happy with what we have, and what our lot has given us? But we can become so obsessed with giving back that it actually affects what, quote, the good life is, and being happy with what we do, and it makes us sad or unhappy or depressed, and we forget the middle ground. That's a question, not a statement. That has always intrigued me.
Awesome. I'm so glad you said that, Gary, because there would be some settings where I would dismiss such an idea, but knowing the people in this group here whose actually lives are committed to service, this is the wrong group to be sharing this lesson with, because in fact, it is quite possible for those who are so committed to giving to not fully appreciate and engage in their own fulfillment beyond that. And so I'm so glad you said that, because it might be a helpful message to preach to like teenagers or to people who truly leave as hedons, but when you're dealing with people who are so intentional and thoughtful and living lives, not only giving of time and of resources, that it may still be a productive question. I'm not sure. Y'all can tell me if it's a productive question or not. But yes, we don't want to live filled with guilt. And we don't want to live filled with a paralyzed sense that for every hour I do something I enjoy, I need to somehow pay that hour forward in some way that's not sustainable. So yeah, maybe it is an unhelpful question. It'd be helpful to hear from folks. But Gary, anyways, thank you for sharing that. Do you want to respond at all, Gary, or is that it?
No response. But I just wanted to make a note. There was a mini series on Netflix called Rough Diamonds. When Pat and I watched it this last couple nights, takes place in Belgium, around Hasidic Jews that are in the diamond business, and the struggle of doing things unethical and illegal compared to living in a world of Hasidic Judaism. May be interested if anybody wants to read it. It's been you can read it, or it's actually done in Belgium. Whatever, but what do you call it? Dubbed. But it was an interesting little series on some of what we've talked about here.
Thank you, Gary, for the recommendation. I want to share one last thing on this point before we move to whoever wants to go next. On Sunday, I officiated a funeral for a 15-year-old boy who died of cancer. And the parents said that one of the things they wanted me to do in my eulogizing, and I never had met him and I didn't know the family. They just were desperate for a rabbi, and it fell on me and I immediately accepted it. They said that they wanted to offer comfort to the teenagers. There were hundreds of high school students there, and they wanted me to speak to them, which was very noble of this family who is going through unbearable grief, that their main concern is their son's peers. And I don't think it's one's responsibility in a time of grief to think about anyone other than themselves in their own grief. But it is quite noble when one can transcend themselves. In fact, I myself am struggling with that. I'm finding in my own grieving this year of my mother, my empathy is narrowing rather than expanding at times. So that's my own problem to deal with. But one of the many things I said to these teenagers was quoted this idea, which is which the New York Times writer David Brooks kind of attributes to something he learned from Soloveitchik. But essentially, and maybe it's an idea you've heard before, he says that America is too obsessed with resume virtues and not enough with eulogy virtues. And by which he means what we tell our teens often and our young adults is, go build your resume, go join clubs for your resume, go get internships for your resume, go get jobs that will advance your career and advance your status, as opposed to thinking more deeply about making life choices that are about our eulogy virtues. To say the things that people will say about us at our end of life is not how good we were at tasks in our work, but about the kind of virtues we lived, how we made people feel, how he helps people. And that was what people focused on. I mean, the dozens of kids wearing hockey jerseys at this boy's funeral didn't talk about how good he was at hockey. They talked about how he made them feel and how he cared for them and showed up for them and the like. And that doesn't, of course, mean we should pursue it for the sake of eulogies. Of course, nobody's doing that. But that we ought to pursue things that have that kind of lasting value. And I shared that with them there. And on your on that point there, I think that was an audience. I know myself as a teenager. I was just so self-consumed in that other model of kind of advancement, of survival in a messy world. And maybe there's a time and place for that too. In any case, let me pause there. Sarah, I see you just came on screen. I think that might mean you wanna hop in the conversation, but it's okay if not.
I'm out here in my garden picking
Great.
giant strawberries, and but as I'm listening, what comes to me is that it's an evolving process. It's kind of, I think, what Judy said, that it's not one thing, and as we learn, grow, our circumstances change, I think we may already always have the same essence, but we're not always in touch with it at different parts of our life, which is what I think you were just identifying. We have to grow into, and for various people, it may come at age 3, but for some of us, it may come at age 70. And we are, I like to believe, an evolving process that we continue to grow, change, learn. And I believe that's really what the rabbis were constantly trying to do, is they tackle all of these questions. So I don't think there's an answer. I think it's an eternal question. I'm
Great.
complete.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate that so much. I think that I myself, and maybe you too, can look down upon our younger selves as foolish. How much, if only I could live then what I know now. I know many people who talk like that their wisdom is in later years, and that was lacking earlier. And if only I had known this or that. And I myself think of not that I'm so wise at all now, but but I look down upon my past more than I do my present in many ways. And I think that is an interesting way to think of things, of rather than better or worse or taking a judgmental approach, there are just such different stages of life that we live through, and there's different times to live different ways, and to kind of appreciate and embrace that fullness of life and life experience and life stages. I've shared it before, but I'll share again, that there's a fascinating Talmudic debate around when Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, wrote his 3 works. Now, if we brought in academic Bible scholars, they might say that King Solomon didn't write the entirety of these 3 books or any of them. But taking the traditional view that King Solomon is the author of the book of Proverbs, the book of Kohelet, how do you say Kohelet? Ecclesiastes. Proverbs is Mishlei, and Shir HaShirim, which is called Song of Songs. So now those 3 are drastically different works. Proverbs or Mishlei is like fortune cookie, simple moral teachings. Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, is kind of dark and cynical, and kind of rejecting a lot of life and the people living kind of with vanity. And Song of Songs is romantic and idealistic and optimistic and full of emotion and passion. And one view says, a young person writes romantic songs, and then they get a little wiser and they write moral teachings, and then they get a little wiser and now they're cynical. And so the order is Song of Songs, and then Proverbs, and then Ecclesiastes. And we all know people like that who become more cynical with age. And the other view is the view that he wrote the works. And I don't remember where Song of Songs falls out in this view. So let's pull that one out of the equation. But essentially that he is cynical earlier and idealistic later. And I can't remember if the idealistic ends that Song of Songs is written latest or Proverbs is written latest. But that kind of the pettiness of the cynicism was something that was transcended in a later stage. And I know people who live like that have become more idealistic with age. And I'm not judging either approach, of course. But there are life stages in our own personal lives for very different orientations towards our lives and human existence. And for some, retirement is their best stage in life. And for others, retirement is very difficult and a stage that they feel unwanted and unneeded and uncherished in ways they felt in earlier stages in life. And for others, it's cyclical, different days, different feelings, right? Of course. So anyways, that's it. But anyway, Sarah, I want to give you a chance if you want to respond to any of that, but just an appreciation for this point of different stages of life.
Well, and to your point about people regretting, I mean, I could certainly regret a lot of things in my life, a lot of choices I've made, but those choices made me who I am today. So I recognize that that's what I needed to do at that time, and I wouldn't be who I am now. And including coming to these sessions with you week after week. So
Thank you.
I celebrate all of it and celebrate the fact that we can change. And I think too many people forget that not only can we change, but other people can change.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for saying that last part too. Yeah, firstly, it is an interesting thought. If we all made a list of our biggest 5 life regrets, maybe you've done that already, maybe you haven't. But let's say we did that, not in the interest of making ourselves miserable. But then if we asked ourselves, if I could actually be brought back to that time and make a different choice, would I? And not knowing how that would change my future. And there are some regrets that might be of the nature that we would make a different choice. And there are some that we might say, I can't participate in this activity because I don't know how much that's going to change. And maybe it's the wrong question. And maybe it's the wrong question because we can't do that. And so we should just be embracing of that and where it has led us. But to your second point, and it's so crucial, we do we often are gentle with us, understanding how much we change and not enough with others. Of course, there can be the opposite as well. It's often said about young children that meet them a week later and they're simply not the same person. Or a kid comes back from college. Although the joke my father told me every time I came home from college, every single time, was a child goes off to college and he's amazed at how much his parent has learned since he got back. He would tell me that every time I got back, which was really true, actually. I was like, wow, how did you learn all this since I was gone? In any case, it's not just true of children and how quickly evolving they are. It's true of all people. And we often dismiss people based on something we knew of them 20 years ago or 7 years ago. And I myself am wrestling with this exact issue now of how much of someone I knew so well 20 years ago do I want to hold in my heart versus really, really see them who they are today. So thank you for that point, Sarah. Yes, hi, Steve.
Hi. First, thank you, Sarah, and everybody else who has talked. It's like a bunch of affinities hiding in plain sight. I kind of knew these things and I needed somebody else to say them. The part about evolution and how we change as we grow, and the idea about celebrating some good things isn't bad. One of the problems I have with giving back is that I don't know how to quantify anything. Is this enough to compensate for that? And also, most of my giving has been, until maybe the past 5 years, because some people have suffered. And I feel kind of responsible for that, but I know I'm not. But I don't want to be toxically positive or flaunt things I have, knowing that people have suffered badly. And should I be concerned by not being able to quantify what I have versus what I'm giving, what people don't have versus what I have? And these are kind of like college first year type of questions that one might ask, but I've asked them a lot. One of the things that I think what was said earlier is that I want to help people celebrate the great things that are happening in their lives as much as I want to give to those who might not have certain things. I think celebration is out there waiting to happen. Many good things. People do great things, discover great things, say great things like have been said here today. And I just want to give a mental hug and say, yay, this is fantastic what you're doing. And that's part of my giving back.
Steve, thank you so much. Just a few things there before Matthew, whose hand's gone up. First, I wanted to share personally that you're one of the most optimistic and positive people I've ever met. And in a way that in no way for me or I imagine for others overlaps with toxic positivity in ways that I've seen dismiss what people really experience. And so I just want to thank you for still being continuing to be my teacher in that of how to be positive without the toxic element of it. I also just want to celebrate keeping alive what you call college questions, which sound like something that we should age out of, but actually how important it is to keep alive some of those core questions in our lives that some people might dismiss as elementary. And I want to celebrate also this point you made here, that normally when we think of giving, we many of us think of filling the gaps, like you said, of what people don't have. But there's another type of giving, which is helping or being in the space of celebrating what people do have. And that is such a great point, because I think it really kind of flips. It flips a lot of the equation and how we view people, not just addressing their emptiness, but addressing their fullness as well. So thank you for all that, and I'm sure others want to engage with what you shared here as well. But first, let's go to Matthew and then Aglaia.
Yeah, just interesting comment that as I've aged, I've realized in terms of giving, being there and listening to the other person's wishes is how critical it is. I've got a relative who's had some, thank you Hashem, to turn out not to be as serious a medical issue as we thought. We all reached out and said, what works for you is what is important.
Right.
Including telling one person in this group, she means it, do not intervene and let her have her space. And in fact, we're doing a lot of schlepping Memorial Day weekend, seeing various people at probably a physical impact on us, which flying to Philly, then Cleveland, then Ann Arbor, because there are people who need to affirm where they are at this point in terms of health and other issues. And I think that's something I wouldn't have done a couple of years ago, is put myself out as much. I think the concept of choose life, there's an affirmative duty to move forward with others if they're willing to have you there to help, and if not, to understand that. So I don't know if that means anything or is helpful, but that's kind of what I was thinking with Steve and other people's comments, that it's aging and realizing that.
Matthew, so thank you. I want to say one thing, and then I want to ask a question back to you,
Yeah,
if
sure.
I may.
Sure.
The first thing I want to say is, how important this point is. I know a lot of people who are very uncomfortable going to visit a sick person in a hospital or going to a Shiva house of mourning because they don't know what to say. So, I don't know what to say to somebody who's sick or who's grieving. And I think that we can be a little more gentle. Say, you don't have to prepare what you're going to say. You can just listen and be in relationship and respond. We're not looking to cure something. We're looking to just be with someone. So I appreciate that and the power of listening to what someone's actually saying. But Matthew, where I want to throw the question back to you, I think one of the areas where I struggle, I don't think it's uncommon. So there are many people who know what they want and know how to articulate what they want. But I know many other people who actually don't know what they want when they're sick or grieving or struggling, and they don't know how to say what they want. And in fact, sometimes people say the opposite of what they want. They say, I'm fine, don't worry about me. Like, no, don't give me that. I don't need it, I'm good. But they actually want help, right? But they don't know how to accept help. And so, Matthew, my question for you is, in the power of listening, what do we do in moments where we're not so sure that the person knows what they want and not sure that what they say they want is actually what they want? Do we override what they're saying, or do we always just trust what they're saying? I'm curious what you or others think about that.
Okay. Because of the odd craziness that maybe someone in this group might know the person, I'm being very vague about what I'm saying because she's very private, doesn't want anyone to know. She had a sibling who wanted to come rush and help, and it would have been the worst thing in the world. She wrote a note. I, for whatever reason, was able to figure out in this woman's note what she was really trying to say to the sibling, and call the sibling and got her to not jump on a plane, which would be the most aggravating thing in the world. And the reason was the woman who was sick. Her husband just retired as a major professor in med school. Her daughter is a doctor for it. So she's got the best treatment. Diagnostic, the surgery and everything was 3 weeks, which is unheard of. And she's fine. But I was able to read between the lines that the youngest sibling would be offended. You're not asking me to be there. I got lucky, I think, this time. I don't know. I'm sure I misread it often, but in this case, I knew the two of them. I was able to read between the lines. I guess it's trial and error and experience. Did I answer you? I don't know.
Thank you. Yes, it is so complicated. And maybe we know, I don't want to label this simple people and complicated people. Simple people say what they really want. Complicated people don't necessarily. Sometimes it's that, but it's more than that. And sometimes someone really wants to come and we're telling them not to come and we really don't want them to come,
What made this worse is the younger sibling's medical specialty is where the illness was. And my answer to her was, gee, are you willing to give up your practice and move cross country and be with someone for 6 weeks? No. Okay, then don't criticize. Don't ask questions. Let her deal with it. Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you so much. Very interesting. Okay, Aglaya, last comment from you, and then we'll transition.
Okay, this isn't a happy note to end on. Are you guys sure? Because it's not happy.
It's the fullness of the Zoom experience, not just the happy Zoom experience. We want the fullness of the experience together. So that's okay.
All right. So what I was thinking about those in terms of, okay, so what kind of life are you talking about? Because sometimes choosing life is not going to actually lead you to a life that, I don't know. So in my case, the reason why I put, if I have to choose between, getting kidnapped by the KKK and teaching accurate history, I'm going to get kidnapped by the KKK, because really though, what use am I? Am I actually really choosing life, or am I choosing, a false life, something that's, not even, I don't know. You could make the case that it's still worth living and you can make changes within the system and all that other stuff though. However, though, I don't know. I'm just kind of like, it's just for me also just thinking in terms of having to, when there were school shootings going on. And then I just told my family, look, if an active shooter comes into my classroom, I'm not coming out of that classroom alive, because I'd rather throw myself at an active shooter than, take the chance that some kid is going to die and everything. And of course, they didn't want to talk about it and all that other stuff and everything, though. But for me, though, I have to think about it in terms of, okay, so what kind of life are you actually choosing? And is this actually choosing life?
Great. That is actually a great place to end
Again
on.
with Microsoft, where
So thank you for that. And I want to invite everyone to take a minute after we close this Zoom, if it speaks to you, to just ask yourself the question, what is one takeaway I can take from today on what it would look like for me today to choose life a little bit more, or to affirm my life a little bit more? It may mean to you choosing kale over fries because you want to live longer. It may mean serving more. It may mean serving less. It may mean choosing the fries over the kale because you should choose your life, right? And so take a minute and say, not in my life, but just today, what does choosing my life, affirming my life mean to me today? Have a great day.